when we asked leadership, how often do you think your teams come in? And almost, I think 75% of them said like 2 to 3 days. When we went back and looked at the utilization, the average utilization across was around 19%. That's not even a day a week. Even if you and I had the same job title, I'm 100% sure you and I wouldn't have the same way of working when we're in an office.
Hello, workplace innovators of the world. Welcome back to Workplace Visionaries, a podcast that gets real about the present and future of how people work. I'm Jane Young from Hubstar, and in this episode is a conversation with Tanisha Krishnan, an architect who also trained in design management and innovation, as well as studying multi-generational workplaces. And she's head of Workplace UK at BNP Paribas. What I love about listening to Tanisha is the clarity of her thinking around workplace change. She goes beyond theory to share practical insights into how workplace leaders can approach everything from the development of their workplace strategy to driving a culture of data-backed experimentation to creating alignment between disparate stakeholders as everyone strives to realise the potential and promise of hybrid work to allow us all to have our cake and eat it by delivering a better experience that enables everybody to do their best work while generating cost savings and improving sustainability. Tanisha's grasp of innovation and how to design for and with the end user, combined with her understanding of human nature and the diversity of their needs and perspectives, plus her experience in working with all kinds of organisations, from universities to large corporates, makes her a pretty special workplace innovator. So don't miss this one. It's full of practical takeaways for anyone wading through the complexity of hybrid work and making this shift to a more agile, dynamic approach that befits today's pace of change. Thanks for listening. Tanisha Krishnan, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Jane. Very nice. Very excited to be here.
Very excited to talk to you today. I thought I'd start by asking you a bit about your background and how it's influenced with an architect originally, and you found your way into workplace strategy. So how do you think that this background in architecture has changed the way you approach workplace strategy or the way that you think about it?
So which one should I go first? Tell you a bit more about my background or tell you about how the background in architecture helps being a strategist?
Do both. Tell us a bit about the background first, and then that'll segue nicely into how it's influenced the way you think about things differently today.
Okay, so like you've already said, my background is in architecture, so which means I am a trained architect, having studied that for 5 years. A very, very, I don't think anyone tells you when you're young how terrible a course can be, how much it can test your patience, how difficult can life be for 5 years, where you don't sleep. You are just so busy trying to get assignments done. But it is something that has taught me how to be a lot more patient. It also taught me how to look at things from a bit bigger picture perspective. Yeah. And so I did work as an architect as well. And so it was interesting to see how you apply all the 5-year theory into real life. And that's when I realized that this wasn't something that I thought I liked as much as I thought I liked. And then I wanted to do something slightly different, something more management related is what I thought I wanted to do. And that's how I got into doing my master's in design management and innovation. And it was the most amazing course I have ever done and kind of set me up towards this route because design management and innovation, the course was all about user-centric design. It was about design principles. It was about putting the user at the heart of any problem and then finding a solution based on what the problem is, as opposed to designing a solution and then reverse engineering the problem. And so in the course, I learned everything from like change management to stakeholder engagement and actually building visions to understand really how do we solve a problem in hand. And I really liked what I did. And so I was like, I want to do something. I want to continue to do something in this spectrum. But I moved from India to London to do the course. And funnily enough, it was like for me to continue to stay here, I needed a job and I needed a sponsorship. And finding a job in this new sector was a bit difficult because I had no background. And the easiest way was to find a job as an architect. Luck would have it that I basically got a job in an architectural practice within the consulting team, which I didn't even know existed in architectural organizations, to help them do strategy work. And the first assignments that I had was to help with universities and helping them rationalize their real estate and their portfolios by understanding actually how they're used, when can classes be held, how can we actually have space outside of classrooms, which I found very, very exciting because I was like, okay, I'm now really trying to understand what the problem is, and then we can come up with a practical solution. And that's when I realized that there was something called workplace strategy as well, which looks at offices and looks at employees. And strangely enough, I had done my my master's dissertation in enhancing the cognitive diversity of millennials in workplaces. And I had no idea how important that dissertation would become over the next many, many years. And that's when I realized, because when I started that research, I was talking about how we don't look at employees as customers. We're only looking at external customers. We're only looking at improving and enhancing systems for customers on the outside. But it is really important to understand that employees are customers on the inside, and they also need to be treated in a specific way so that they can be productive and businesses can basically flourish. And then when I got into the world of workplace strategy, I realized how relevant it was, because that's how we were looking at things. That's how we were trying to help organizations understand what the value is in them, and how we could actually build all of these different pieces together to solve different problems that organizations are facing, whether that's the physical workplace, whether that's getting employees engaged with the organization, whether it's building cultures so that people can be can flourish, can bring them their whole selves to work, where psychological safety is something which is important. And it just allowed me to look at a spectrum of options on how we could support organizations actually cater to employees in a different way. And then to the point about architecture and how that's shaped how I look at workplace strategy, is I think it gives me a slightly different perspective from the point that I do understand floor plans a lot more easily than someone without a background in architecture, which means it makes it much easier for me to help organizations see and visually see what we're talking about conceptually, whether that's activity-based working, which is jargon to them, which we understand really well. But it's also even understanding the basic concepts of how people use space, which I use very often in my workshops in terms of getting people to actually tell us where they do different activities on floor plans, which helps them just basically bring to life how stuck they are to desks. But it is things like that just that background helps in terms of reading floor plans, in terms of designing spaces that are slightly more inclusive, that are slightly different. But also additionally, it allows me to bring a lot of patience to the job, which I think that as strategists, there is no one right solution. It's a journey. And also it's a journey that we need to take leadership and different stakeholders on. And we can be faced with a lot of different hurdles through the way. And I think it just teaches me that we just have to keep at it and we'll get better.
Nice. Oh, it is a really interesting background. And so could you describe a day in the life of a workplace strategist? I'm sure there's no such thing as a typical day, but maybe paint a picture of what that is like.
Strangely enough, we host interns every year, and I was introducing them to workplace strategy, and they asked me a very similar question as to what does a day in your life look like, and I was it's a good one to think about because I've never thought about it, and then I realized that I think it really depends on what phase of a project I am in. Because I think that typically all strategists will know that we follow a process of collecting data, translating the data into, like, analyzing it and translating into what that could actually mean for organizations. And then obviously building up the recommendations on how we use this entire data to make things better. So I think that what I mean by which phase I am in a project is what dictates a typical day in the life, is because if we're in the data collection phase, then I will be on constant back-to-back calls, which basically means, or I'll be in in-person workshops. So it means that either I'll be having interviews, so I'll jump from one to the next, or then I will be leading and facilitating workshops, which could be either virtually or in person. Then if we're in the next phase, which is data analysis, then you probably won't see me at all, because I'll be very busy with like a couple of screens, scanning through all of the data, trying to find all the real nuggets and insights. And then it will be pulling the report together. Or then if we're in the next phase where we're translating the needs, then again, it will be a lot of co-design workshops that I'll be doing with project teams, with leadership, to actually say, this is what the data is saying. This is the story that's come out of all the information we've collected. This is what you think is happening. This is what is actually happening. How do we think we want to move ahead? This is what we think you should be looking at, because this is what the benefits would be. And so it is, again, like somewhat a change management program where we've already started engaging with senior stakeholders so that they see the value in investing, whether it's in the physical workplace or the technology to improve the way people work, or even culturally, if there are certain things that we need to cater for. How can we start looking at all of these different aspects that would build the whole picture? So again, those will then be in person usually, where it's a lot of fun, where I'll be in a room having post-its all up over the wall, having conversations and showing them different, which I really, really enjoy, because it allows me, it gives me an insight into how different organizations are designing their offices, because I need to show my clients what other people are doing as well. And so that would be the next phase. And then ultimately, if I'm in the last phase, which is actually helping get leadership buy-in into a probable recommended way forward, then it is, again, it's back to heads down report writing, because then it means that there's a lot of cost analysis that goes behind it. There's a lot of building the business case. So again, we go back to all the data that we've collected, put things together so that the project team can take it back, or leadership can then start making more clearer decisions on the way forward. So no one day is the same. And it really is dictated heavily by which phase of a project I'm in. And additionally, whenever there is a bit of downtime, a lot of it is spent in researching, which means reading a lot of the studies that are out there. So many people doing fantastic jobs in the sector that we are in, and seeing what they are having to say, looking at research papers, looking at articles, blogs, journals that people are writing about how their organizations are tackling it, what are they learning, what's not working, just so that then I am well placed to give recommendations to occupiers.
Very interesting. And throughout all that, what have you found are ways, in what ways are offices not designed well for the end user today?
I think progressively so, it's obviously changing now, because people are realizing that you cannot have a one-size-fits-all, because even within teams, people work differently. But I think offices where you just have rows and rows and rows of desks isn't what offices need to be. Or you just have lots and lots of closed meeting rooms. Again, not the way offices need to be. Or I think really dull and dark spaces, even if you've got a good variety of space types, is not a place anyone would want to be, because I think natural light plays such an important role in just well-being, and people feeling engaged and people feeling motivated, that I think that is also really important, like a very important factor, because I think amenities, support spaces is all secondary. I think people would really benefit from having the ability to work where it's naturally late and they can look outside and see some form of interaction with the outside world. I think is extremely important. So yeah, these are the three main things, like not having lots and lots of desks because it can get very loud and very distracting. Having just way too many closed meeting rooms because everyone's coming in to collaborate. Cannot have that. And I think most importantly, you cannot be in a dark room and expect people to work there from 9 to 5.
Yeah. It's interesting the evolution we've gone through, isn't it? And that open plan thing seemed like a great idea for a while. And then obviously evidence came out to say that actually, no, it's making collaboration worse. And so now we're in a bit of not a no man's land, but I think there's definitely a recognition, isn't there, that we need more collaboration space, more social space, fewer desks, but we do need focus space. And we kind of know all this stuff, but knowing how much and what exactly and how who to involve in the process, when, and the actual details of getting that right are not easy, are they?
And so I was having a think about this, and I was like, I love saying the word in the right time right now, because I think being in this industry at this time is just excellent, because there's never been so much experimentation happening before. There has never been this kind of appetite to actually do things differently. However, there is no right answer. So no one really knows what is the right direction of travel. And that's the thing though, how much is too much asking is again a big problem. Not every organization wants to be engaging at all the different layers. And rightly so, because they just don't know whether or not they're going to implement any of the recommendations that you're making. And the people are going to feel like we've been asked this multiple times, we don't see any change, and they don't want to be committing to something that they don't know whether or not the business has the appetite to invest in, but they still want to understand what the probable avenues are. But then on the other hand, also, it's not a wish list that we're trying to get out of employees. It's a very much, at least that's our approach, it's a very needs-based approach on really understanding what the basics are. So in any of my conversations ever, whether it's through surveys, whether it's through focus groups, it's never, oh, so what do you want from your future office? We have very specific
big open.
Exactly, because if you ask anyone what do you want, everyone's going to say, I want the moon. You're not going to be able to give them the moon.
Yeah.
So you don't want to overpromise and underdeliver, because that then will highly impact engagement, which is not good for any business. And so, I guess it is just about understanding what is the right amount of interaction. I had read somewhere that if you even manage to get 25% of the organization to buy into your concept, you will then successfully implement change, which is
enough to get the ball rolling.
Exactly, which is just 1/4 of an organization. So it's ideal if you can speak to as many as possible. But if the stats show that even 1/4 is enough, we're not really asking too much.
Yeah, that makes sense. One of the guests, in fact, the first ever guest we recorded for the podcast was Dr. Craig Knight, and he talks a lot about involving employees in designing the space. And he talks about, it's all very well to have designers come in and make this beautiful, cool, minimal place that wins awards and things, but it's not necessarily the most engaging and collaborative and healthy environment. And if employees feel that they have a say in the design of their space, then that can actually produce far better outcomes, even improving improving intelligence and quite unexpected things, productivity, and because they have this sense of autonomy and involvement in it. But in practical terms, how can you there's a few components to that. First of all, how do you practically engage people in the design of their space? And if they're not always using the same space, I suppose a team neighborhood would be repeated use of a same space, and then you might have some territorial ownership. But what do you think about all that?
So I have genuinely found it quite useful to have employees engaged in these aspects, only because it's just basic human nature that you would buy into something if you were a part of making that decision. It's like children, like you can't go tell your child that, oh, you cannot have the ice cream because I said so. It's more about explaining why you can't have the ice cream, and they will buy into the concept. So it's very similar, because I think up until now, not up until now, it's been 5 years since COVID happened, but up until COVID, everyone was so particular about owning a desk, having my own space. I spend 8 hours a day, 5 days a week in the office. I need to have the ability to put the picture up of my family on my table. I want to have things a certain way. And so for them, letting go of that desk was quite a big point of contention. And especially when FM teams and real estate teams would try and reduce space, I think the easiest way to do it is to reduce the number of desks you have.
Yeah.
So I think at that point, it was the most difficult challenge was to get people on board to let go of their desks. However, now with fewer people coming into the office, it's a much easier sell saying you're hardly in, you've got your own locker, you can keep things where you want, but you're going to have to share your desk. But the whole point is that even if we brought these people along the journey slowly and steadily, trying to explain to them this is how you work. And that's what I was saying at the beginning is I usually run these exercises with right from leadership to employees to get them to understand how they use space. Because I don't think they, like we as strategists and we as designers understand generally how people use space. But when you think about it from a layman's perspective, whose background is not in this, their typical day in the life would be I just go into the office, I sit at my desk, and I attend meetings. They don't understand that they're not interacting with anything else outside of the desk.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you slowly start getting them to understand how they use space, how different activities can be supported by different space types, they actually see that, oh, this is beneficial. Oh, so I don't have to do all my meetings at my desk, is it? Oh, so I can use those pods. So those pods are meant for this. Oh, but if I had to do like a report writing, where can I go to do that? And you've had all these discussions with them so that they actually understand that as like your day in a life, your profile, you've got so many activities that you would typically do. You've been doing all of these just at your desk. However, we're now providing all of these different elements for you to be able to work at. This is how you should use it. And that's when I think, and I don't mean that we get them to tell us where a particular table goes or where a particular meeting goes. It's more about getting their buy-in on the different settings that they could use for their different activities. Ultimately, obviously, you get design experts to design the space because they obviously have a better aesthetic sense. But the idea is to get these people into the conversation on what type of spaces they need so that they can be productive when in the office. Because not everyone's worker profile is the same. Even if you and I had the same job title, I'm 100% sure you and I wouldn't have the same way of working when we're in an office. And so it's just trying to understand these journeys, understand what kind of activities they do. So which means what kind of space types would they need so that they can then contribute to these aspects because you've then heard them out. You've heard the fact that I get really overwhelmed if I'm sitting in an open plan. I need to go and work from somewhere else at least for an hour a day. And you've catered for that need. It means that they've been listened to and they would then eventually buy into this concept much more easily as opposed to, this is what we've done. We've created a quiet room. We've not heard what you've actually said. We've just created some space. People aren't actually going to use that. And the other way that I've seen how employees have been engaged in design is through very simple options of showing them a different look and feel, color palettes, showing them different types of furniture, getting them to select what they think would reflect the brand the best, getting their input on it. And then obviously, and it also depends from organization to organization on how much they want to involve their people. But these are some basic things which won't have any significant impact on decision making because it's like we've already decided we're going to change the space up. These are the three different color palette options. You help us choose the one that you like the most. They felt like they've had some kind of input into the way things are going. Also, the other thing that I have done in the past, which has worked really, really well, is there are times when even leadership can't make decisions on certain aspects of the design. So, for example, I was working for a design organization and we were doing an internal change program where we were going to move locations. And the idea was that they really wanted to do something different in the new location in terms of the way the office was set up. And so it was simple things like we didn't want to have all 1,600 desks. How about we mixed it up with more touchdown spaces and not like you've got 4 banks of desks, and then you've got a touchdown table, and then you've got 4 banks of desks. This was slightly different because it's an architectural practice. They wanted to have the ability of right next to the desk, we have these huge touchdown tables where we can roll out floor plans, we can keep materials there, have discussions around it. And there were 2 or 3 options that were on the table. And then we took it back to like employee forums and said, which out of these do you think would be the easiest for your team to work in? Where are the gaps? And then we took that feedback back to the leadership and said, these are the things that will work, these are the things that won't work. So it's not really about getting them to do the design for you, but it's getting their input on things where sometimes leadership are stuck, or sometimes where we just want to get their buy-in in from a very early start.
So one important thing as well, I suppose, that you can't always predict the future, even, no matter how many surveys you do, no matter how much data you look at, you don't always know what the outcome is going to be when you try something new. So how do you think about and approach experimentation?
So I think that is like the most amazing way of doing things. I think that a lot more organizations now are willing to pilot, and I think which is very exciting. And like I said, was one of the teachings of my master's as well, that in any design process, you build, you test, you iterate, and that's the only way your solution is going to keep getting better, because no one knows what is the right solution, especially in today's current environment. Also, a solution that works for a particular organization may not work for another organization, even though on paper you're doing practically the same thing. It's just the way individuals work is so different, and also the buy-in at different levels is different. And so if you can test on smaller grounds and then see how things work, and then learn from it, and then do something better, that has the highest, obviously, return on investment in terms of any money that you're putting in it. It also means that people get a chance to do and try things before they're committing to it on a long-term basis, so they know whether or not that works for them. And also it means that you can learn on a smaller scale, as opposed to going ahead and redoing, 100,000 square feet of space, spending millions of pounds, dollars, whatever on it, and then you realize that it just doesn't work. People aren't doing these things. Or also investing in like massive programs, like whether that's free food, whether any of it, we don't know whether it's going to work. And so testing it on smaller scale, seeing what actually works for me. And the other point about it is not just doing this on a smaller scale, it's actually taking the learnings from it so that you can improve it, do something better, is as important as testing it on a smaller scale. Because there's just so many small things that you learn in these test beds that are so beneficial for when you go to invest in bigger spaces. And it can be even small things like when we were talking about involving employees, have had clients where we've tested furniture types. So whether it is just bringing in different form of settings, so whether it's the stand-up tables, whether it is a phone booth, any of it, it is just bringing a couple of them in, testing it over a short period of time, seeing which one actually works for those teams, and then investing in more of them has really, really worked wonders for many organizations that I've worked for. One of the examples that I keep giving is I worked for a Magic Circle law firm a couple of years ago, and they were looking, and this was during COVID, and they were looking to understand what the future of work would look like. And we'd come up with concepts of how, and they were quite progressive in how they wanted to change up the way their floor plates function, right from exploring for the first time that partners would share offices. Not every partner would own his own office, to also having spaces where like those partner offices could be converted into meeting rooms when partners aren't there. Plus that, because not everybody is coming in every day, you start sharing desks. All of this was being explored like 4 years ago. Then they're moving to a new space in 2027. What they did is, in their current space, they have refurbished one entire floor with these new concepts where There are shared offices between partners. There are different types of tables, different types of desks. There's a lot more collaborative settings within the open plan. And they've obviously put in sensors everywhere so they can monitor. Now, the interesting thing is they've got every team in there for 3 months of the year. They monitor how those teams use those spaces, what's actually working, what's not working. And then they're going to use all of that to help design the new space that they're going to go into in 2027. And that is just so, that's amazing what they're doing, because it just means that the partners have had a chance to see whether this actually works for them or not. They've collected solid data in the form of obviously utilization. They've done feedback surveys after these 3-month cycles, and they actually know what is going to inform the design of the new space. So when people go in, they've been brought along the journey because they were made a part of this. They actually could then say what worked, what didn't work, which settings they preferred, how the design of the new space should be. Because when we were here, our team needed 6 desks in a row, but then this touchdown space actually really helped us. So they were then brought along this so that they could then help shape the design of the new space. So the change management journey as well has started way before they even founded the new space for their move in 2027. And I think that it's such a fantastic way of designing a future space, because their future space is not going to look like anything else anyone else has done before, because they've tried and seen what works. And also what works for team A may not work for team B. And because they've had all these people go through this space, they can actually cater to these different needs as well.
Yeah, I remember talking to a company that they'd rolled out kitchenettes everywhere, and they spent a fortune in all these kitchenettes on all these floors, all these buildings. And it just turned out, thinking it would just attract people in, they had free food, they had all the stuff, thinking it would be this great thing. No, nobody used it at all. And then, that's what we started helping with the data to try and do some experimentation. But there's a lot of components to all the stuff you just described. There is the data component that's important, actual usage, how are you looking at that? And then there's the change management component of how you actually get people on to do things differently, isn't there?
And also I think apart from that, it's also just overall because on a day-to-day basis, it's very nice to see things on a floor plan or to see images of it. Everything looks nice, but until you actually practically start using it, you don't know what's going to work and what's not going to work. Because even simple things like all of these really nice looking high back sofas, they aren't the most practical in a lot of locations in the office. Because if you're thinking about people being able to plug into a screen and have conversations, for people to come together with their teams on an ad hoc basis, irrespective of whatever the task at hand is, we've all got it. We're also dependent on our laptops now. Because if you have to talk to someone, you do have to dial them in. You want to look at something, you do need your laptop. So you then have to understand what configuration of space is actually going to work to enable that to happen. So it's just learning it on the go that will help you realize. So it is just so important that even in your house, when you move in, you set things up a certain way. Once you start living in it, you then start moving things around because you're like, oh no, this is more comfortable, that is more comfortable. And that's how you have to do it, even in a workspace, is you do have to keep adjusting as you continue to live in the space.
Another component of change that's quite interesting is the policy side of things, because it's just been such a whirlwind, hasn't it, in the land of hybrid policies.
It's absolutely, but that's the funny thing, I think obviously because the US has a much larger market, the headlines are coming from there, where it talks about all of the big organizations, so many of them mandating return back. However, then there are amazing researchers sitting there as well who put out research which does say that yes, there has been an increase in the percentage of mandates, because it's gone up from 13% to 23% in this last quarter. But the actual attendance has only increased 2%, which just basically...
It's not working.
And there are a lot of reasons why that is possible. One, because obviously a lot of organizations have cut down on space. So there isn't enough space to bring everyone back in. So not everyone's going to fit in. The other aspect is the travel. Not everyone wants to spend 2 hours one way commuting just to work.
Yeah.
And the other aspect is also the fact that I myself have worked for organizations, consulted to organizations that don't have the basics right, where you
Yeah.
go into the office and you don't have a desk that is set up really well. If you go in and you try and connect to the screens don't work, the cables aren't fine. You then are roaming around the office trying to find a desk where all of these things actually work. And you've already spent 15, 20 minutes just finding a space. In some other offices, you've got leaking roofs and there's just water everywhere, and you're just sitting there and you're like, why have I come in? The other point is you go in, you don't know who's going to be there, whether anyone from your team is going to be there or not, whether you recognize anyone that's sitting across the floors. What's the whole point in going there, sitting by yourself at your desk, eating lunch alone? You could do this at home.
Yeah.
Like, why would you bother making that entire commute to go there unless there's a proper purpose, or you know that there are others that are going to be there that at least you can have a chat with? It just doesn't make sense. So there are multiple factors that are impacting that there is no increase in attendance. But the fact is also that people are just now so used to the flexibility that it's going to be difficult to reverse it. But the other reality behind this is that even pre-COVID, none of the offices were 100% occupied.
We just didn't know or think about it so much.
Exactly. And it wasn't an important factor at all at that point of time. And in the UK, the average utilization pre-COVID was like 65 to 70%. Mm-hmm. In the US, yesterday, someone told me, which I didn't even know, I thought it was around the same. But apparently there it was like 58 to 60%. And which means that now, and all of this was because you have to take into account sickness, you have to take into account annual leaves, you have to take into account people being on client sides.
Yeah.
So there was just never 100% utilization of offices. So now it's just become a much bigger debate because it's a known fact that people aren't in the office anymore. But I just think that it is really difficult if people have managed to be as productive, meet all the deadlines that they have, still doing the job that they need to do. They're still bringing in the numbers that they did bring in before, to convince them to come back into the office 5 days a week. I think it's a very, very difficult ask if there is nothing that really sits behind it apart from I said so. And also the point that, yes, I know over the last, I think, almost 9 months now, we are kind of shifting. So it had become an employee's market during COVID just because organizations were needing a lot more labor and were just hiring massively. And so employees had the upper hand. But over the last 9 months, I know the tables have turned. I know that the job vacancies have, for the first time, dipped in comparison to the number of people seeking jobs.
Yeah.
And so it is changing slightly, the way going back to being an employer's market. But I still think that if you are looking for the right talent, top talent, everyone's going to be fighting for those people, and they will still be demanding flexibility.
Yeah, it's an interesting dynamic, isn't it? This sort of cost reduction mode that people have gone into, because the pandemic was a bit, it was just this whoosh of activity, wasn't it? And almost everybody was changing jobs and everything was going on, and there was huge growth in some areas and technology and everything else. And we kind of pinged the elastic band back the other way a little bit now, haven't we? We've got these cost reduction pressures and the uncertainty in the economic climate. Then we've got the AI thing and the hiring slowdown that people are all watching that. And then there's, like you say, this expectation that I'm going to have more autonomy. And I don't want to lose that. So people are absolutely prepared to quit their job and go for a job that will enable them to work anywhere, or at least have more flexibility. So there's a lot going on there, isn't there? And and that access to that global talent pool is also something that's hugely valuable for some sectors more than others. But that's the other part of the equation is, how flexible can you be in order to get the best talent wherever it is and however it wants to work is a big question. And then interesting data, you see the likes of the Atlassians of the world, and the most flexible companies often have higher office attendance than the least flexible companies. And you can only imagine that's because
people want to be there because it's a good buzz. It's the kind, if you're the kind of company, it's like correlation versus causation in a way, isn't it? If you're the kind of company who's likely to give people a lot of autonomy, it's more likely that there will be a positive culture where people want to come together because they feel that sense of agency and they feel that energy about being together, and more likely that they'll also care a lot about experience, and therefore when you get there, it won't have the leaky roof and nobody there and everything else. I think there's another study I saw, I think it was a Dutch study, that said the tighter they screwed down the mandates, the less people came in. So again, there's so many psychological and socioeconomic and all these dynamics going on at the moment, aren't there?
No, and that is so true, that I think that it's not only saying that the more autonomy you give people, the more they will come in. You need to have the infrastructure in place for them to come in. Like we spoke about some of the really good examples of how they're doing things. They are investing in people actually coming in together. So right from Airbnb to, and I know I'm going to pronounce this wrong, so I'm going to apologize in advance, but Atlassian, is that how we say it? They are also doing, they are actually bringing people in for a purpose. They're paying for these guys to come to these spaces with an absolute need to be being there. When they're going to be in there, they know that the rest of their team is going to be in there. They know that the time in that space is going to be productive. It's not going to be that I'm going to come in and I'm going to dial into a meeting and I'm going to be speaking to everyone else that's somewhere else. So what's the point in me making that journey? And I think an additional aspect to this is it's not only that a particular generation is looking for flexibility. This is across the spectrum. Then even Gen Z, who we believe are the most likely generation to be much more in the office, and rightly so, because obviously they do see offices as being a place to build social communities. It's a place to learn. It's a place to grow. But even 84% of them in a recent study have said that they are actively looking for jobs that offer flexibility. So I think that there was another report that said that the top people that actually were impacted by mandates are women and top performers. So we have to just be a lot more inclusive in understanding that mandating people back to the office has also financial repercussions to your employees, because everything from childcare to even coming into the offices, because it's so expensive now, it isn't as simple as I don't want to go because I don't want to go. There's just so much attached to the I cannot go because of X, Y, and Z reasons. We really need to start being a bit more empathetic. And I think the other very, very interesting thing is that not even 5 years from now, so by 2030, it's expected that 74% of our workforce is going to be millennials and Gen Z. And obviously Gen Alpha, by the time they start coming in, it's still a while. But 74% of them are going to be belonging to these two generations. However, all the discussions that anyone is having right now about the future of work is happening with leadership that belong to either the baby boomer or Gen X generation. They're the decisions for the next 5 and 10 years. And none of these people are really a big part of the conversation. And the way they work is significantly different from the older generations. And so I think that if we're talking about future-proofing, yes, no one knows what that looks like, but I think it is important that we start involving these groups as well within the discussion, because the way they think about work is very, very different. Because I think also the Gen Z generation is probably is one of the only generations, as compared to anyone up until now, that has had the freedom, autonomy to do different things. And also a lot of people will also argue that it is something that is more necessary, and they're having to do it out of compulsion as opposed to choice, is that they're having to do multiple jobs at the same time. And they're not in one job, but they don't see that as their only source of income. They're doing multiple gigs to have different sources of money, which is excellent because it gives them so much more freedom and they're not tied to one job. But that means we really need to rethink what work will look like in 10 years down the line, because it will be different. Because if these are the ones that are making majority of the workforce, and they believe their work is different, then that's how we need to adapt.
Yeah, it's a different set of expectations at play that can conflict with one another, isn't it? And if you've got this, if there does seem to be this growing desire for balance as well, and the younger generations looking maybe at the baby boomer or Gen X parents and thinking, well, I'm not sure I want to go down this path, or even if this path is viable for my generation, in terms of that long term, like you say, it's the long career path and the progression through that, but also the financial issues. I mean, a lot of people the younger people feel worried they will never own their own house. And there's all these different aspects. And well, maybe I'd rather just live up a tree and go to Bali and go in a co-working space and then go here and there. And people can do that now. And so, but then there might be also a perception by their older boss that, well, that's not proper work, and you should be able to, that you're not working if you're not visible. And so there's a lot of mismatched expectations. And also I think there's maybe a lack of understanding of how to lead in a remote first environment as well, because I find that really funny that that there's this strong, this assumption, I guess, that if I can't see you, you're not necessarily doing what I think, which is funny because obviously you can Skype in the office. You can just be on Facebook all day or whatever in the office. And so being in the office is not the important thing. We've kind of become really obsessed with place in a way. And also I think that is maybe, and then we talk about, well, let's measure the outputs and the outcomes rather than the time spent at your desk. And I think, well, even that might be a little bit flawed, because measuring outcomes is not that easy for many jobs. If you're a salesperson hitting a sales target, there's an outcome. If you're answering support tickets, you answer support tickets and there's an outcome. Not all jobs are as easily quantifiable. But one thing I can say for sure is that if you have, if your manager and your team kind of know who's working hard and who's not, I mean, and it's almost like some of the transparency of what people are working on, and that asynchronous sharing of what our priorities are. It's almost like we just need to be better at leadership. What is leadership at the end of the day? It's setting a clear, here's what good looks like, here's what we're trying to get to now, and then it's mostly stepping back and letting people get on with it, and letting people set their own targets, letting people tell you what they're going to do to contribute to that goal, and then letting them track their own progress and share that with you. So I almost think that change management and remote first leadership, all of that stuff is actually synonymous with good leadership.
100%. And I think the other thing is that, I think it has been spoken for many, many years, that not all managers are meant to be managers. A lot of people have been just promoted to that position because they've been in an organization for a very long time, or because they've got years of experience. Not everyone knows how to manage people. It's a very different skill set to be a manager. And if you're in that position, especially when you're then being asked to hit targets in an economy that is so much under pressure at the moment, you're having to look after teams that you don't know how to look after because you're not a people person. Can you just imagine the amount of pressure that builds up on managers? There was also, I think, Gallup has released their latest report on engagement, and it does show that the lesser engagement from a leader is impacting the engagement of the teams.
Yeah.
So the more pressure that they face, they're going to get less engaged, which means the teams are going to get less engaged, which means overall the engagement across the organization is going to reduce. And I think we really are forgetting in the whole grand scheme of things that managers need support. Yeah. And if this needs to work, or even if it needs to be in person, because like even having someone in front of you and you cannot identify that the person is struggling, you're going to lose the person. So it's just that managers really do need support, especially right now, in completely new ways of working. You said that there's so, like you said before, there are so many things that are changing, right from AI coming in, people fearing that that's going to take up their jobs.
Yeah.
That's the thing, right? There is a lack of knowledge on what is going to impact you and how, whether that is even about the ability to work from home, because we all went and did it without anyone being prepared to do it. Mm-hmm. We then continued to do it just because it worked. But there was just never any guardrails put around it. There was just never any support put around it to make this flourish, because it was just done at the drop of the hat, because everything had to shut down. everyone managed to do it. But now if this is going to become a lifestyle, we actually need to know how to make it better. And I think that's where there is a big gap at the moment, is where there are some that are doing a fabulous job. There are some that are genuinely struggling. There are others in the middle that are just waiting to see which way we go. And it is going to impact everything. And I don't think people in the middle have a lot of time because there are these expiries coming up. Every organization does need to make a decision on what they do about their space, about their people, about talent. Because also there was an organization that I was working with last year that is looking now to onshore a lot of their services that they had pushed away and had gone offshore. So it's things like this that people do have to start understanding and taking acknowledgement of what is it that we actually need, as opposed to where our people are working, because that is probably got the least significance when we're looking at things from a bigger picture.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And as you say, all organizations are at different stages. And I think a lot of organizations look at these aspirational ones and think, oh God, we're so far behind. We've such a long way to go. So if you were going into an organization and assessing where they're at, like what is their current state of readiness or advancement in terms of this future ready workplace dream, how would you go about that? How do you go about assessing where you're at and what current reality looks like so that you can actually paint this picture of, okay, here's where we are, here's where we need to be, and how do we get there?
I think it's really interesting, that question, only because so what I usually do is we start with leadership one-on-one conversations. So anyone that's sitting in Exco or C-suite to understand what their vision is, not only for their department, but also for the business as a whole. And having one-on-one conversations first enables them to be open about what their aspiration is, as opposed to it being influenced by what somebody else on the table has said. And so we get absolutely a very clear idea of what that person has to say. Often,
everybody says something different.
but that's what I was going to say. That's what we believe.
Yeah.
There will be like a trend across
threads,
because it is just, everyone has very similar expectations from what they want their business to achieve. How they want to do it is where you'd have very different opinions.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Might want everyone back in the office all the time. Someone might want to give absolute flexibility. Someone might want to try new technology. But what they want to achieve is all just the same. How they want to do it is where the difference is. Once you start showing them that everyone is, so then once I do these interviews, I then play back to them what has come out to be the vision based on everything that they have said.
Yeah.
I then take this vision also back to the employees through whether it's through the survey or whether it's through focus groups, and test what they think. How is the organization doing if this is what the vision is? Whether it is like, I don't know, we need to have an office we're proud to bring visitors to, or this is an office space that allows me to be productive. We test all of these with the employees, see how they score it in terms of what they think the current space, the current technology, the current culture allows them to do and not do. And then I play that back to leadership saying, this is what we said our vision is. This is how your people rate where they think the organization is on being able to achieve these or any of these statements hold true. This is where the big gap is. And this is what the actual reality on the floor is. So it's quite eye-opening for them to see that. And they also acknowledge it a lot of times, because there are a lot of simple things that no one is going to deny. If you know that the setup in the office doesn't work, you yourself have experienced it, you know it doesn't work. So you're not going to then say, oh, no, that's not true. So you then start seeing that, yes, this is what we want to get to. These are the things that are getting in our way. This is how our people actually perceive what is going on. And then it is about now joining the dots. If this is what we want to get to, these are the basic things that we need to get in place. So it's as simple as, if organizations turn back and say, like leadership, and there is a lot of research that's been coming out on this as well, that when you ask leadership what the purpose of the office is, everyone will say it's about collaboration, it's about socializing, it's about bringing people together.
Yeah.
When you look at the floor plan, usually almost around 60 to 65% of that floor plan will be desks, okay, which means that what their main vision is collaboration, socializing. There isn't enough space to do that. Then when you take it to the next layer and you ask employees, even if when you ask them what their purpose of coming into the office is, it will align with this. It will be around socializing. It will be around building relationships. But when you ask them what is their most important activity for their role, it will always be focus work, which means that we still need to provide for focus work, and we need to provide areas to allow that to be done productively. But that doesn't mean that that needs to be 60% of your floor plate.
Yeah.
If your main intention is of bringing people together to be able to come and have conversations. And I think the other big thing that is absolutely missing is learning and development from like a younger population perspective. It's about building relationships. If you're saying that all of these are important to you, these are the purpose of the office, you cannot only have a big canteen and a cafe area and expect that that's where your relationships are going to be built. Or you cannot have just rows and rows of desks, assuming that people are going to talk to the person that's sitting next to them. It's about creating these intentional areas that people can actually, like, it's as simple as if you're at the coffee station, if there are some seats around that coffee station, and if you bump into someone, you will go sit down and have a quick 2-minute conversation, as opposed to just like exchanging a smile and walking away.
Yeah.
So it's creating these spaces that will allow you to build these relationships, will allow you to have chats with people outside of the desking areas. So it is thinking about how can we create these journeys so people are coming together with that purpose in mind, which is socializing, which is building relationships, which is actually growing and learning and developing. It doesn't have to be a desk space. It doesn't have to be 5 days in the office. It has to be, how are we creating these experiences that people can do this and it comes second nature to them, as opposed to being forced to do something. And I think that is what is missing right now, is for us to get this relationship building as fluidly as possible into workspaces.
So would you say one part of that picture, I guess, is making the invisible visible, in the sense that as an employee, I want to be able to see really easily, who's coming in, what's going on any given day of the week in the office? Is there a cool event happening? Is there a keynote speaker? Is it the company town hall meeting today? And is my best friend going to be in tomorrow? Is my so having that visibility is one part of it, so that people can decide for themselves what's the best time, what's the best place for me to go in. And then when they arrive, that clever design of space to actually foster those interactions and bring people together in the right place at the right time. What role do you think data plays in all of that?
I think that it's the main lever that will help make decisions, because I think that it is so easy for us to sit here and say, these are the things that are missing, or this is what we need. You can, and like you said, no one can predict what the future is, but if you can see what the data is saying, like what trends are coming out, what are people perceiving things to be, you've got something solid that you can base your recommendations on. Because like we said, what works for one does not necessarily work for someone else. And since every journey, every organization has their own way of doing things, it's so important to collect and understand what works for them. So that data is specific to that organization. And I was telling someone even yesterday, I have not till date, and I've been doing this over a decade now almost, is I've never had the ability to use one report that I created for one client and then replicate the same for another client, changing the data. I've never been able to do that. I've had to always start from scratch, because every organization has a different story, has a different way of doing things. Yes, some of the principles might be universally applicable, like yes, everyone does want to have lesser desks, but the way it fits into an organization is very different than the way it would fit into another organization. Also, it's like demographics play such a big role, cultural differences play such a big role based on location. And so it's like I've never been able to replicate a report just as is and just change the numbers and giving back the same thing to another organization. I think that is why data plays such an important role, because if you are trying to convince someone that something is applicable to them, they need to know that it's coming from their source, as opposed to, KPMG is doing this and this is why it's applicable to you, or Amazon has just gone ahead and announced this and this is why it's applicable to you. It's not. They have done it because it's applicable to them. And so if we look back into ourselves and our own data and what it's telling us, it will help you make a lot more evidence-based and informed decisions, Because I don't think you can just sit in a vacuum and decide what's going to work for you unless you actually collect how space is being used, how people are coming in, what are the patterns of usage, how do teams actually work. When people are in, what does their work profile look like? You're not going to know. And also within a particular team, I could be of a different worker profile, you could be of a different worker profile, despite us being in the same team. And we just need to understand that if we play this data back, that on average, this is what it looks like. This is how things are. And not every organization having a lot more collaborative spaces is going to work, because maybe a lot of, for example, we were working with an organization last year, a big population of theirs are contact center based. Now, when they come in, unfortunately, their profile is such where they are going to be desk based almost 6 hours of the day. It's just the 2 hours that they will probably be in team meetings. And all things, you cannot take these people away from their desk because they do have to be available for the calls. If for such an organization, you only created collaborative space, how is it going to work? And that's the thing, right? That you have to show them that this is what your people do. This is how they work. This is what the data is telling us. It's going to give leadership the confidence to make decisions, because it's so easy to say that Zoom has created the most fantastic office, which has amazing collaborative spaces, has the most updated technology ever. But that's not going to work if your organizational profile is so different. And so I think that if you want to make informed and evidence-based decisions, you really need data to support it.
That makes a lot of sense, because in some ways, best practice is deeply flawed. And because if you try and copy what somebody else does, to your point earlier, then you're not going to get the same result. There's too many variables, and businesses are complex adaptive systems that are super messy, and you can't always, it's easy to overestimate the control you have over that. And you try and solve one problem because this is the problem that should be solved, and then bang, that one down and 50 more pop up that you weren't expecting. So I guess for any given place and space, there's like that people data you're talking about, that hybrid profiles. What do they actually want? What do they do? Who are they? And then there's the utilization of how that space is actually used. And then you've got the data on what space you actually have, and your supply of space, and how you can tweak and tune that according to the different sharing ratios you want, and the different ways you allocate neighborhoods. And there's a lot of parts to the puzzle in terms of understanding where you're at and being able to make those data-driven decisions, isn't there?
Because the other thing is, we worked with an organization 2 years ago, and when we asked leadership, how often do you think your teams come in? And almost, I think 75% of them said like 2 to 3 days. When we went back and looked at the utilization, the average utilization across was around 19%. That's not even a day a week. And so it's like, if you have data, it's so powerful in helping make decisions. Because if suppose leadership and this is for every part of the spectrum, it's not just, oh, you've got such a huge ability to reduce space. But if leadership think that they actually want people to be coming back more in, and your average utilization is only 1 day a week, but you think you want people back in 3 days a week, then we need to be putting systems in place to enable that to happen. If that's what's going to be, that's what's needed. What are we doing culturally? What are we doing technologically? What are we doing physical, like from physical space perspective, to enable that to happen? How are we empowering our managers to allow these discussions to take place? How are they then having those discussions with their teams to ensure that people are coming in 3 days a week? Or we thought people came in 3 days a week, people are coming in 1 day a week, we're fine with that, which means now you can actually reduce your portfolio significantly, because that's basically how you want to go. And then it means that if people are coming in 1 day a week, the probability of them coming and sitting at the desk is 20% of the time. Then we can design an office which is a lot more collaboratively focused to allow that to happen. So it's things like this that actually help them make decisions either way to then set themselves up for success. Because otherwise, if you believe people are in 2 to 3 days a week, you're doing nothing about it. You're just going to keep the amount of space you have. It's still underutilized. It's still you managed to invest in getting a little bit of better furniture. People are still not going to come in because you think that they're coming in 2 to 3 days a week. They're not. So you've not done anything actively to change that. It means that you've invested all of this money that no one's going to use. It's just not going to meet any of your success metrics if you've not actually got data to back how you want to move ahead.
That makes a lot of sense. So there's many different levels to it, isn't there? There's the portfolio level of data. What are we going to do about these lease decisions? That level. What are we going to do about, down to floors, down to individual teams' needs, and then I suppose having data that each team could potentially see on their use of space and to drive those discussions as well. But I guess one thing that's tricky about spaces and places and people and that whole thing coming together, like that, this coming together of people and portfolio. That's a whole foreign language to each of those in some sense, isn't it? I mean, the CRE people and with all their lease stuff and their capex stuff and then you've got space heads, space planning sort of level when you familiarity with floor plans and sharing ratios and all that stuff, neighborhoods, zoning, and then you've got the HR people who are more about the policies and the engagement and the experience, and it's quite hard in some ways to find the right level of conversation in order to arrive at the right decisions. I mean, I've heard organizations, for example, really dialing their sharing ratios into the red so that they've got rid of a lot of space, they've reduced a lot of costs, they have this idea it's going to be super vibrant, and then there's been a decision from the leadership to adjust the policies and get more people in, and then they don't have the space for those people, and there can be this disconnect, I guess. And have you seen that playing out? Do you think how do we get to this solving this alignment problem? Maybe part of the answer is data, maybe part of the answer is we've got data coming out of our ears and maybe we need to tell better stories around it? Or what do you think's the answer to the alignment challenges that we face now?
I think the whole point is the alignment now, is the fact that until now, all of these teams were working in silos. Mm-hmm. And then now increasingly, I see a lot, like what the clients that I work with, there will be at least one representation from each of these teams as part of the project team. So we're having like a cohesive decision-making process on how things need to move forward, because none of this can be done in isolation. Yeah. So for example, you cannot have, like an estate won't work if people are not there in it. So you can have however less, whatever amount of space, but if there are no people in it, it's not going to work. Yeah. Secondly, people aren't going to come into a space if the space doesn't function, if it doesn't do the basics. No one's going to make the travel, or even if there is no travel, they're not going to come in because it just doesn't match what they need it to do. Again, if there's no technology in it, because we all are working hybridly now, whether you want to do it within your organization or not, you're going to still have to do it externally, because a lot of other organizations are doing that. So to even interact outside of your organization, you're going to need to be set up in a hybrid way. And so technology is going to be needed to do that. If technology is not going to be there, people aren't going to come in. People aren't going to come in. Your real estate is pointless. So the whole point is that all of these pieces of the puzzle need to be working together to build the bigger picture. Yeah. And I think it's becoming so important that all of them have a speaking place at the bigger tables to help make the decisions. Because if either one of them was only there, then it's not going to build the whole big picture. Yeah. And so that's why increasingly when I set up project teams for the organizations that we work, there will always be a representative from at least one from each of those different teams, because their timelines need to match with your timelines as well. Mm-hmm. Because you could go ahead and do up the space, but if technology haven't had their piece of the budget signed off, that space is not going to function without it. So they need to know what you're doing and what your timeline is, so that they can align their timelines, they can align their budgets, and everything's delivered together. Also, when all of this is happening, HR needs to be 100% involved, because they're the ones that are going to help communicate. They're the ones that are going to help engage the people. They're the ones that are going to help bring all of this to life by bringing this energy into the space. Yeah. And so all of them need to work together, as opposed to you do you and I do me. And I know that this has happened for many years, but I think that is really significantly changing. And I also think that it is becoming important now, I think, if organizations are more focused on an employee experience, about attracting and retaining top talent, that if, like a lot of my clients now are actually HR as opposed to real estate or FM, or I am working for someone that reports into HR or people as opposed to procurement or finance. And that makes a big difference, because then it means that the more people-led, and I'm not saying being driven by the bottom line is wrong, because all of these teams ultimately do need to make all of this work towards the bottom line. But I think then your priorities are just slightly different in the way you look at the solution, as opposed to it only being driven by costs. It's also driven by needs and people in engagement. And I think that's what is important, that no matter who leads it, everyone needs to be a part of the co-designing the solution, because otherwise, like you said, there will be just failures because something will not sit, something will not fit at the right time, and then we're not basically working towards one cohesive goal.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I guess the promise of hybrid is that we can have our cake and eat it, in the sense that it's this magical way of reducing costs and giving us this better experience, which done right is we can realize that promise to some extent. And it is nice to see that obviously CRE leaders suddenly experience is really high up on the agenda. But the other point you mentioned there that was interesting, and I don't think people talk about much, is that timeline thing and the coordination of that and the alignment of cadence and timing, because in some sense, the legacy approach to workplace from a CRE perspective, I guess, will be very annual planning cycle based. And, imagine doing your annual space plan now and then basing it on headcount and then thinking that's all going to pan out. That's not going to work now, is it? I mean, this more agile, iterative approach where you can make adjustments almost in real time based on what's going on with us. Oh, it's our company town hall. We can see in our predictive data that normally means we have to open up this space, or maybe with this neighborhood's running hot and we have to open up more space over here, close that over there. You can do this real-time adjustment. But even more so than that, because headcount is not static, and you sort of not even headcount, but the way people use space is so diverse and so much in flux, that ability to constantly reassess how you match the right people to the right places it's a whole different ballgame versus the old annual planning. Wait, sorry, this fly is really pursuing me. So there's something interesting there in changing the way that the cycles of change need to really speed up, and that agility is not something, I guess, that needed to be a big deal in real estate until now.
100%, because this agility now is playing out in very, very different forms, right from length of leases, because not many organizations, that has changed slightly over the from the start of this year, but until last year, a lot more organizations wanted shorter leases or flexibility within the leases, so that they were looking at more options as opposed to just signing traditional long leases. Now, only because there is a shortage of good quality space, a lot more organizations are willing to sign longer leases just because there is a shortage of quality space. But if that wasn't the case, there still would be this big flexibility of wanting to have this agility in lease types. I think the other agility is also, like you said, to be able to flex or to shrink as the business needs. Whether that is in form of the different types of spaces that you can open up, close up, have multifunctional areas that people can use as and when needed. And obviously, we also have the other form of agility, which is to be able to work from anywhere and just be productive or do an activity where you're going to be the most productive. If you think you have to write a report and you think home's the best place, that's the place. You think you want to solve a problem and the best place is the office, then you go to the office. And just having those options is very important. So I think, agility is right now playing out in people need it in different forms and shapes, just to ensure that they're not stuck in commitments that are very long and very difficult to get out of.
Yeah. It's kind of something that all disciplines go through at some point, isn't it? The software folks began the whole agile thing. I think it was on a ski trip. Some techies got together and made up the agile manifesto back in the day. And then all of it, marketing has been through it, sales has been through it, HR has been, it ends up everywhere for obvious reasons. The more complex and fast moving the environment, I guess, the less likely it is that we can lock ourselves in a room, come up with a plan, and then by the time it's finished, have it actually make any sense, or even have our original assumptions remaining true. So just shifting gear to the big picture for a minute, do you find that most organizations actually have a vision for the future of work in their organization, and are they aligning that vision of the workplace towards this? Or, you talked a lot about the generational shifts that are happening and that balance of younger people, and things, we may be getting some things wrong about that, but what's your experience in terms of the level of vision that organizations have? Because it all feels a bit unpredictable and uncertain right now.
So there's a mix, obviously. Some organizations, and I don't mean that they can tell us what the future of the business is going to look like 10 years down the line.
Yeah, we don't have the ball
at all. They can very confidently tell us what they would like to be achieving as an organization, at least over the next 4 or 5 years, which is very helpful, because then it at least gives you an idea of where the priorities are.
Yeah.
And if they get that right over the next 5 years, it means that it's going to mothball into X, Y, and Z over the following 5 years. Some organizations, obviously, the ones that are in the middle, who still can't make a decision on where they want to go, it's a bit more difficult for them to do the bigger picture thinking. It could be because the industry is in flux, the industry that they're working in is in flux, or that they're just not meeting targets, and so the only rationale is people aren't in the office, and so should we bring everyone back in? And also, I think because of all of the big headlines, it can get a little deceiving from a leadership perspective as well, as to if what we're doing, is that actually correct? A mistake or not? And so I think it is. I do not envy a lot of most CEOs, because I think it's what they're trying.
It's not easy, is it?
At all, and what their leadership teams are trying to achieve is very difficult at the moment, especially because you just don't know what the future of work is going to look like. But I think there is still a good sense in a lot of leadership teams on at least where they want things to potentially go, what direction, because some of them are very strongly opinionated on the fact that they don't want people to be back in 5 days a week, because they themselves don't see the value in it. They acknowledge the fact that AI is going to be taking over a lot of the admin-based jobs. Doesn't mean that they're going to get rid of all of their workforce, but it means that we need to think about how it's going to impact us, what changes we need to bring in. They also acknowledge the fact that one size doesn't fit all, that we really need to understand that different teams work differently. They need to work with their managers to come up with what's best for them. And if that's working for the team, well and good, as long as it's not impacting the bottom line. I do not genuinely care where they're working from. All that matters to me is how they're working, and are they able to do what they need to do, and that they're set up to do that. And I think those are important principles and guidelines that they actually need to have clarity on, which then helps everybody else that's below them to follow that vision, whatever that may be. And I think that is what is important. I think just the ones that aren't really certain about where they want things going is where it starts. And I think that's where the big gap is, that I think leadership at top level are very clear about what they want. I think employees at the down level are very clear about what they want. I think it's the middle management where most organizations are struggling, because one, like we spoke about before, they aren't equipped really well enough to deal with the layers below them in this virtual world. They're being pressurized from the top because the leadership are quite clear about what they want. And then filtering that through to the bottom is where it's becoming really, really difficult. And I think this middle management really needs to be empowered, trained up, so that these conversations can happen in a better way, and so that vision that the top leadership are seeing can actually be achieved. So I think the short answer is that I think the ones at the top do have an idea on what they want, how they want to go ahead. What that looks like, probably not everyone has a clue, but at least they know which direction they want to be moving in. But it is that middle management that needs more support.
Yeah. Well, we've got just about at time there. Is there any final thoughts you have and things that people aren't thinking about that they should be thinking about, or that they aren't talking about that they should be talking about, or any final thoughts that you leave for the audience?
I think that there is there's this one thing that I've been seeing a lot more is a lot more organizations want to either get into buildings where landlords are providing a lot of amenity space, or they think that the solution to bring people back into the office is providing a lot of amenities. And I don't think that that's the solution.
Yeah.
I really think that understanding actually how your workforce operates, where the barriers are to why they're not coming in, because it could be things like childcare that you've got no control over.
Yeah.
It's probably travel times that, again, you have no control over. So rather than thinking that the answer is more amenity space, a gym within the building, free food, investing in all of this without actually understanding the problem is not going to be the solution. So I think there is, yes, occupiers do want to be in buildings where landlords are providing a lot more amenity space, just because it allows them to be part of better buildings and offer a bit more to their employees. But it's not a solution to bring people back in, is basically the point. The point is that we really need to understand where the barriers are, understand what works, what doesn't work. And I think it is said more than enough number of times, but I still think I would like to repeat it, is one size doesn't fit all. So just don't get carried away by what the headlines are saying. I think each business works differently. Each organization is set up in its own way. And if you are already achieving success, just following what everybody else is doing will probably take you steps backwards as taking you ahead. So I think that is something that, don't be attracted by amenities. It's understanding really what the problem is. But I do think that increasingly organizations need to be a bit more conscious about their sustainability agendas, because if we are looking to attract Gen Z generation, they're very vocal about how they work for organizations whose purpose matches theirs. So they do have to become a lot more vocal about that. I think we do have to really consciously understand what these next generations are going to want from work. And I'm not talking in terms of an office space, I'm talking work in general, because that will obviously impact what offices would look like, what kind of technology we're using, how people work together. And I think organizations really must be investing a lot more from a learning and development perspective, whether it's management, whether it's employees and their progression, because I think those really drive engagement a lot.
Yeah, well said. Well, Tanisha, thank you so much for sharing your time, your perspective, and honestly, your passion and your energy, and you just bring a lot of life to this topic. So I've loved this conversation with you. You're so full of insight, and you really articulate the challenges that we're facing today and ways to solve them very articulately. So I know our listeners are going to be walking away from this with a lot to think about. Really appreciate you being here. Thanks again.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure being here.